Hello, let's start this review about ancient Greece. Okay, the first thing we need to know is the chronology. The Archaic era, which is the first era in this period of history, the Archaic era goes from the 8th to the 6th century before Christ. The Classical era goes from the 5th to the 4th century before Christ. And finally, the Hellenistic era goes from the last third of the 4th century, which is basically the beginning of the reign of Alexander the Great, to the 1st century before Christ. Well, if you know this, if you keep this in mind, then we can move on. First thing we are going to see is the Archaic era. And in the Archaic era, what we need to know is something quite simple. Okay, if this is Greece, let's say that this is Greece. Greece was not a unified country. There were many different cities. All of them kind of spoke the same language, kind of shared the same beliefs, but still they were independent cities, independent tiny states, independent communities. The most important ones were this one here, which is Athens, and this one over here, which is Sparta. These ones were the most powerful ones. These cities were called, they have a specific name, okay? So one of these cities is called polis. It's called polis, okay? Polis. And a polis means independent, self-sufficient city. That's the definition of polis. The plural is polis, okay? Polis is the plural, okay? So Athens and Sparta were polis from Greece. Okay? Each one was a polis. And as I'm telling you here, they were kind of independent, self-sufficient. So Athens was one polis, Sparta was another polis. They have different types of government, and this is what we are going to see right away. Let's see here. Sparta. Sparta, they had an oligarchy. Oligarchy meaning the rule of few people. There were few people upon the government, and these were the rulers and nobody else. And these people were 2 kings and 5 ephors. Ephors were judges that were accumulating so much power, and eventually the ephors, these 5 ephors, had even more authority than the kings themselves, okay? So this group of people shared the power, and that was it. That's why we say that it was an oligarchy. Oligarchy means that the power is in the hands of a few people. Then Athens. Athens was a democracy. Was a democracy. Over time, they developed a system in which the free male citizens, because women were excluded from politics, the free male citizens could participate in politics and vote for their representatives, just like as we do today. All right, so these are the 2 systems, the 2 political systems that have to be very, very clear in order to differentiate Sparta from Athens. All right, well, I would say that that's enough from the Archaic era. And now if we move to the Classical era, here, Classical era. What we are going to find is that Greece was starting to develop and they were doing quite good. But nothing lasts forever, and they had enemies. All right, so let's say that all this area was Greece, okay, all this area in blue. All right, but here is the thing. here, this territory here was part of the Persian Empire, a very powerful empire. The Persian Empire controlled all this area, which is called Asia Minor, by the way, all Asia Minor, all the way to India, all Middle East, Central Asia. So it was a huge empire, huge, powerful, very well armed empire. So it was the terror for their enemies. So they wanted to conquer all Asia Minor, and they started harassing and attacking some of these Greek cities. So the Greeks had to fight back. They had to defend themselves, obviously. And the Persians were on the attack. They went north. They were going along the coast, conquering all the lands, all the cities, winning all the battles, and they got here. They got to Greece. So the most important polities, as you know, Athens and Sparta, they decided to join forces and fight the Persians back. And actually they did. They won a very important battle over here, the Marathon battle, Battle of Marathon. They won a very important battle here, the Battle of Salamine, and another one over here, the Battle of Plataea. These are the most important battles, okay? And the Greeks won the war against the Persians. It was a huge victory. It was something huge. So let's see some details about this. Greco-Persian Wars. Part 2. If I can expand this thing. No, not like this. Okay. Greco-Persian War. First one, it took place in 490 BC. Second one in 480 to 479 BC. Battles. Battle of Marathon, that belonged to the very first war. Battle of Salamine, which was actually a sea battle. It specifies Sea Battle of Salamine for 480. And Battle of Plataea. 479 BC. Okay. These were the main battles, and eventually Greece won. Greece won the war against the Persians. But now that the Persians were defeated, Athens became a very relevant city. They were rich and powerful. Athens here. And the Spartans, they didn't trust the Athenians. They thought that eventually Athens were becoming too much powerful, and they could conquer all Greece, even Sparta. From they could take their freedom. So Sparta decided to fight Athens, and they became involved in a war, Athens versus Sparta. So they have been allies against the Persians, but now they are going to fight each other. Okay, then, so Sparta, Athens got some allies, and they formed the Delian League. Sparta got some allies, and they formed the Peloponnesian League. So it was Athens and friends, Delian League, versus Sparta and friends, Peloponnesian League. Eventually, Sparta won this war after many years, almost 30 years of fighting. And the Athenians were defeated over here in a naval battle. Over here, it was over here, the Battle of Hygopostamus. The Battle of Hygopostamus, okay, in 405 before Christ. Well, so that was the end of this war, and Sparta was victorious. So let's write down the basic details of this war. This war was called Peloponnesian War. Why? Because that section where Sparta is, that section of Greece where Sparta is, that area is called Peloponnesus. Peloponnesian War, okay. It lasted many years, as I said, from 431 to 404 before Christ, almost 30 years. The ultimate battle was the Battle of Hygopostamus. It was a sea battle. And finally, Sparta won. But here is the thing. Yes, Sparta won the war. But after so many years of fighting, they were very weak. Athens was very weak because they lost. Sparta, even they won, it was very weak as well. So it was a dangerous situation because if you're weak, anybody can take advantage of that weakness. And that is what happened. That is what happened. But this happened in the next era, in the Hellenistic era. So by the mid of the 4th century, here is Greece, Asia Minor, north of Africa, blah, blah, blah. So here is what happens by the myth of the I said 4th century before Christ, the kingdom of Macedon, which is by the north of Greece, the kingdom of Macedon decided to take over the whole country. Okay, so this is going to be under the control of Macedon. The king of Macedon in that time was Philip II, and he was able to control all Greece. Now, Philip II had a son, and this son is one of the most prominent characters, characters in history, in world history. It was called Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great decided that he was even more ambitious than his father. Alexander the Great was more ambitious. He was really, really ambitious. And his reign covered from 336 to 323 BC. So he decided that he was going, okay, let's see. Okay, let's see what happens here. Let's see if everything is correct. I think it is. All right, we were saying that Alexander the Great decided to decided to expand the territory of Macedon. So he started conquering all this area here. Then he went down to the Middle East. Then here, Egypt, he became the Pharaoh of Egypt. And then he went back over here. He conquered Persia, Persepolis. He became the king of Persia. He got to India. And when he was by the valley of the Indo River, fighting the Indian civilization, his army told him to stop. His army was exhausted after 10 years of war, more than 10 years of war. They were really exhausted and they wanted to go home. So that's what they told him. And Alexander didn't want any trouble with his army. So he decided to go back. Okay, and as he was going back, this is the route of Alexander going back. They went through Persepolis, and when they were over here, more or less, this is Babylon. He died. He died of fever. He died of fever. Okay, so big trouble because Alexander didn't have any children. So there was no heir for such a big empire, okay? There was no heir for this huge empire. So eventually his generals decided to divide the empire among them, okay? So on one side we have Asia Minor was for King Antigonus. This territory over here, not this, but this territory over here was for King Seleucus. Okay, all the former Persian Empire. This territory here was for King Ptolemy. Okay, so he became the Egyptian pharaoh. So all these people were the most important generals of Alexander. Okay, and they decided to share the pieces of Alexander's empire among them, since he had no children. All right then. So that's basically the end of the empire of Alexander. But after some years, after almost 200 years later, something else happened. This is basically the end of ancient Greece. Greece was taken by the Romans. In 146 BC. It was called the Battle of Corinth. All right. Battle of Corinth. So Greece has been taken by the Romans. But as I told you before, Egypt was still the Kingdom of Egypt here in North Africa was still in hands of the Greek dynasty, the Ptolemaic dynasty, the dynasty of Ptolemy. But by the year 31st before Christ, it was taken by the Romans as well. And that was basically the end of ancient Greece, okay? So, let's learn a few things about Greek society now. Just a couple of things. Let's start from the Greek gods, okay? So, the most important gods were the Olympic gods. There were 12 Olympic gods, but we are going to study just, let's say, 6 of them. Probably the most famous or the most relevant ones. We have to start with Zeus, obviously, who was the father of the gods, the most important gods, the leader of the Mount Olympus, and the god of thunder too. So Zeus. One of his daughters, Athena, was the goddess of wisdom and war and justice too. And there was another god of war, actually, who was Ares. But Ares was kind of more sadistic, like he just wanted to fight all the time. And Athena thought that you have to go to war only if it's a just fight, if the fight is going to be fair, if you have to defend your land or your territory. This is Athena, Ares. We have also Poseidon, god of the seas. Apollo, god of poetry and music. Also Aphrodite, goddess of love. Okay, I would say that these are the main ones. So let's learn these ones, and that would be okay. Finally, we are going to see something about art. Art was really relevant for the Greeks. And when we talk about art, we have to talk about architecture and sculpture. Very good. And when we talk about architecture, let's start from architecture, we have to talk about these architectural orders. Architectural orders. What is this? They built their temples and stadiums and other buildings according to some rules. So you can find some differences among these manifestations of architecture, among the temples and everything. Now, the main difference is located in the columns, in the top of the columns. If you look at the top of the columns of some of these temples, you will see some difference in the top piece on the top of the column. The top piece is called capital. And if you see, let me see, something like this. Yeah. If you see at the top of the column, this is a column and this is the capital. If the top of the column looks like this, with this rectangular piece, pretty simple, then it's going to be Doric order. If the top of the column looks like this, with this kind of spiral shape, this kind of volutes, then that's another order called Ionic. If the top of the column looks much more elaborated with kind of 3 leaves, something like this, then it belongs to the Corinthian order. These are the 3 main orders, okay? And now we are going to see examples. So let's see, if you remember these shapes, and we go here, this is the Parthenon. And if you see the top of the columns, you will say, if you have paid attention, that this is the Doric order. If we go to this other temple, this smaller temple, this is the temple of Athena Nike, also in Athens, upon the Acropolis, you would say, looking at the top of the column with these spirals here, that this is Ionic order. And if you take a look to this one, to this temple, and if you see this kind of 3 leaves decoration in the capitals on the top of the columns, then you have to say that this is Corinthian order. This is, by the way, the temple of Zeus Olympic in Athens. Today, only this section is preserved, only this section. The rest of it was completely destroyed, and this is a digital recreation, as you probably notice. Okay, then. If we are going to talk about the sculpture, then we have to differentiate between eras. In the archaic era, the representations were very simplistic, very primitive, very rigid. So you see the head of this lady, the hair, the arms, the skirt is very simplistic, very rigid. That's the main characteristic of the archaic era. Okay. If the statue represented a woman, it was called Kore, K-O-R-E, Kore. Okay, so this is the Kore of Auxerre. If the statue represented a man, like this one, it was called Kouros, K-O-U-R-O-S. This is the Kouros Anavisos or the Kouros of Creso. You can see some of the anatomy, some of the muscles. His leg is ahead, so it looks like he's walking, but it's still very rigid, very little movement, very little expression in his face, in his hair, okay? Now, if we move on to the classical sculpture, we are going to see that the body is much more developed, it's much more perfect. The shape, the expression, the expression, the tension of the arms, the muscles, the chest, the abdominals, the contortion, the twist of the body. This is an athlete, it's a discovolus, okay, a disc thrower. It was made by an artist called Miron. So this is the Miron's discovolus, Miron discovolus. All right, classical era sculpture. And if we move to the Hellenistic era, the development of the body is even more accurate and more perfect. Here you can see of the muscles in action, the tension of the muscles. You can see basically every muscle of the body, the veins, the expression in the face is really accurate. You can feel the pain of this guy who is being beaten by snakes along with his sons. The hair, the expression of the sons, the bodies, the twist of the bodies, everything, right? So this is an example of Hellenistic sculpture. This one is called Laocoon and his sons. And Laocoon basically was a Trojan general. He didn't believe that the Trojan horse was a present for real, so he distracted the Greeks. He was right, actually, if you know the story. But the gods were by the side of the Greeks, and the gods decided to send punishment to Laocoon and his sons, and the gods sent them snakes that eventually beaten them and ate them. So this is what this sculpture represents, but I want you to appreciate the perfection of the representation of the bodies, okay? This is an example of Hellenistic sculpture, and this is it. This is the end of the unit. This was this short and quick summary of ancient Greece, and I hope everything is clear. If you have any question, you have my email. Please take that online test before the exam that you have on the website. I'm going to leave a link to that test in the description of the video, just in case you haven't taken it yet. And that's basically it. See you in class. I hope everything is understood.